Hello my fellow kin, welcome back to the channel and welcome to another unit analysis video. In today's episode we'll be taking a look at the infamous Hernkyn Pioneers. As always, we'll take a look at what they actually are, figure out how to best equip them, understand how to best use them, look at some stratagems and combos, and of course wrap the video up with some important considerations for when you decide to bring this unit. But before we go any further, I want to remind you all that we now have a Discord server for the channel where you could join free of charge and interact with a growing community of like-minded Votann players, talk tactics, share photos, and even get your models featured in my weekly videos, as we see here with this absolutely beautifully painted Pioneer by one of our Discord members, Luke. So if you want in on the fun, don't forget to join our server using the link in the description below. So who are these guys? Well, in the lore they represent the League's fast-moving planetary explorers, scouts, and are essentially pioneers for the army. On the table, they represent a really fast attack-moving unit. It's cheap, it's mobile, it has really good early-game pressure, and late-game scoring potential. It is extremely flexible in its use and can be used primarily to score secondaries and play a utility role, or can also be grouped up to be a damage dealer. In terms of data card, we're looking at movement speed 12, toughness 6, with a 4+ base save, 3 wounds, leadership 7, and OC 2. So what we get in this package here is a really fast moving unit, semi-durable, with really good primary play at OC 2, and good secondary play thanks to its movement speed. It also has a really powerful ability, other than Scout 9 inches, which allows it at the end of your opponent's turn to essentially pop up from the board, enter reserves, and at the start of your next turn, you get to come down using the reserve rules. This is really nice because if you use it late enough in the game, it essentially allows you to teleport across the board to go wherever you need to be to score any type of secondary or mission play. You also get a bunch of weapon options, most of which are stock. And so the stock ones involve a bolt revolver, which is just a pistol. You get a bolt shotgun, which has assault, which is really nice because it allows you to essentially advance and still be eligible to perform an action. And then you also have a Magna Coil autocannon, also on the bikes baked in. You then have the choice between 2 other weapons, and you could take one of these per squad of 3. And so you could choose a Highas rotary cannon, which is sustained hits 1, 24 inches, 6 attacks, 4 up ballistic skill, strength 6, -1 AP, 1 damage. You also have the option of taking an ion beamer instead, which is sustained hits D3, 18-inch range, 3 attacks, BS4, strength 7, -2 AP, 1 damage. You lastly have the option of several war gear abilities. And so if you're taking a squad of 3, you're able to take 2 of these total. So you could choose between a comms array, which on a 5+ you gain a CP. You could choose the panspectral scanner, which allows you to ignore cover, very powerful. Or you could choose the roll bar searchlight, which is a little bit more situational, but has some pretty good utility in that you get to ignore stealth on targets that you're shooting at. Worth mentioning now, I'll talk about this a little bit later, but you can run these as squads of 3 or 6. And so if you're running a squad of 3, like I said, you choose 2 of these war gears and you choose 1 weapon, being the Highas or the ion beamer. And the model that gets this weapon gains an extra wound. So they're going to be at 4 wounds instead of 3. This is pretty good for wound allocation if you're fighting something that has a 3 damage profile, because you essentially get to have an extra save where you otherwise wouldn't. There's literally no reason not to take this. It's free. Conversely, you might opt for a 6-man unit instead, and in this case you get access to all 3 war gear abilities, and you choose 2 models in the unit instead of just 1, and gaining the additional wound each. And all this comes in at just 90 points for 3, or 180 for 6, so it is very cheap for what you're getting here. In terms of equipping your models, the first decision you have to make is what kind of ranged weapon do you want to run on your model? Are you looking for the Highas, or do you want the ion? Competitively, everybody always runs the Highas. But is this really the only viable option? Let's math it out and find out. As always, I'll walk you through the math on the first weapon profile and then skip ahead when I'm doing the other weapons, just so you get an idea as to where the math is coming from if you want to run through it yourself, and you have a better understanding as to how I got those numbers when I show you everything together on the tables. So the first weapon we're going to look at in scenario 1A is the Highas. And as always, my assumptions are 2 tokens on the target and bare bones, meaning you're not affecting anything by stratagems or cover or anything like that. And so the weapon again here at the top is sustained hits 1, 24-inch range, 6 attacks, BS4, strength 6, -1 AP, 1 damage. When we factor in sustained hits into the total amount of hits that are going to be hitting on a 3 with a judgment token, we wind up with 5 hits total. Running these 5 hits against the different toughness profiles based on the wound roll needed, we get values that look like this. So against something that's less than toughness 6, you'll roll 4.17 successful wounds. Against something that is T6, you'll get 3.33. Between T7 and T11, you'll get 2.5. And then at the T12 level, you'll get 1.67. And then, as always, I simply took those numbers that we calculated against each toughness bracket, and I ran them against the save characteristics we could see at each level. And what we get is a table that looks like this. And so what we see on the left is the first column, which is telling us the toughness. And then, of course, the rows at the top correspond to the different save characteristics in the game. And what we get is a table that summarizes the amount of total unsaved wounds that go through. Now, usually you'll see 2 rows of numbers, one colored and one that is not, because we have to, of course, multiply the amount of unsaved wounds by the damage profile or damage characteristic of the weapon we're firing. In this case, the Highas is only 1 damage, which means whatever we get as an unsaved wound that goes through is the amount of damage that goes through. So to make things simple and not make it too disorganized on the screen for you, I just kept the raw number that you see there, which is both the total amount of unsaved wounds that go through and the total amount of damage that goes through. Nice and simple. Now you'll notice immediately, it looks like when we're not considering invulnerable saves or just regular saves, the most amount of damage we could get with this weapon is if we're shooting something that is less than toughness 6 with a 4+, 5+, or 6+ save, or something that is toughness 6 at either a 3+ or 4+ base save. This is where we get realistic target profiles at these toughness levels. So for example, at toughness 6, we're not really shooting into anything that has a base save of 5 or 6+. They're going to probably be either 3+ or 4+. And so I put here what would be the ideal target for you to shoot this weapon into to get the most amount of damage. Shifting over to the invulnerable save characteristics, we actually see some very similar results at less than toughness 6, at a 4++, 5++, or 6++ save. So we get some pretty good damage that goes through with just this one weapon. And then at the toughness 6 level with a 4++, we get 1.67 that would go through. And just for a quick example here, if I were to shoot this gun in a squad of Skitarii Vanguard, we can see by plugging in their toughness value and their save characteristic at being less than toughness 6 and a 4+ base save, this gun alone would kill 3 Skitaaris. So this on its own doesn't really tell us all that much. Let's take a quick look at the Ion Beamer and see how the two compare. So over here I put the Ion Beamer profile at the top. Again, it's sustained hits D3, 18-inch range, 3 attacks, BS4, strength 7, -2 AP, and 1 damage. And once again, we're running the exact same assumptions of 2 tokens and bare bones. So it is not being impacted by cover, which we ignore anyway, and it's not being impacted by any stratagems. Running the exact same logic I did before, we get a table that looks like this. And what we see is that it looks like without considering invulnerable saves, so just the base saves, we get some pretty nice damage that goes through with this gun at something that's less than toughness 7 with a 4+, 5+, or 6+ base save, or something that is toughness 7 realistically with a 3+ save at 1.33 damage with this one gun. Taking a look at the invulnerable saves, we see that we're probably going to want to shoot at something that would be hit by the 5++ or 6++ at less than toughness 7, where we get the most amount of damage being 1.67 or 2.08 respectively. We also see at toughness 7 with a 5++, we get 1.33 damage that goes through, which is probably a realistic target that this weapon might be shooting at. Now, I put the two tables side by side, and the first thing I want you to notice is the damage for both of these weapons individually is actually quite low and comparable across most of the targets here on the screen. However, one area where we see significantly higher value from one weapon is at the less than toughness 6 level and a 5 to 6+ base save. So something like cultists or general chaff, for example. Here we actually reliably pick up between 1 to 2 extra models per shooting activation with the Highas, as the weight of fire is way more favorable than the higher AP of the Ion, despite it essentially negating a saving throw. Even at the T6 level, where we would expect the Ion to come out ahead because of the higher strength, we actually still get more damage, albeit very slightly, with the Highas, except for the 2+ save area where we get some marginal extra damage with the Ion, but it's quite insignificant. So it looks like overall the Highas is much better into weaker toughness targets. But what about something that's a little bit tougher? Well, it looks like isolating for realistic save characteristics at this level shows us that the Ion will actually only outperform the Highas into something that's toughness 12 and only by about 0.19 damage, which is insignificant. It tends to fall slightly behind everywhere else other than toughness 7 exact. But again, we're talking about negligible damage here. We really see the impact of weight of fire when we examine the invulnerable saving throws. In this category, no matter what toughness bracket you look at, the weight of fire from the Highas simply outperforms the Ion Beamer, as the extra punch of AP is wasted. Putting this all together, the Highas has more shots and it's way more flexible than the Ion Beamer. We have weight of fire, which is significantly more valuable when we consider that both of these weapons have a very similar strength and damage output characteristic. It's fairly close, except for very low toughness targets. In these cases, the Highas always comes out on top. Now, when you consider the weapons on the bikes and the role that they play in your list, they're designed to pick up low toughness, low save models. They are anti-infantry. And because of that, the Highas better complements the stock options you have available on these units. Ultimately, the one extra strength and one extra AP isn't enough incentive to counterbalance the half number of shots you get with the Ion compared to the Highas. And because of that, you will always take the Highas. Do not take the Ion Beamer. Well, that was pretty easy. Not too much math to do because there's only 2 weapon choices for this unit. But I did mention at the start that they have 3 war gear choices, of which you can only bring 2 in a squad of 3. So how should you choose which one to bring? Well, the decision is much easier than you might think. You have 3 choices. You have on a 5+ after using a stratagem on this unit, you get 1 CP. You have ignore stealth and you have ignore cover. And if you're taking 3 pioneers, you take 2. And if you're bringing 6 pioneers, you get to take all 3. Really, there's no math needed here. We don't even need to consider the 6-man squad because they get to take all 3. So when we look at just the 3-man pioneers that only get to take 2, we have to consider the role of a 3-man unit. What is the point of taking a 3-man pioneer squad? And what we want to do is mainly 3 things. We want to screen, we want to go for secondaries and primary, and we want to block. Movement block units, get in the way of things, and use our maneuverability. That's not to say you're not going to take this to do any damage, of course not, but it's not designed to do that when you're only taking a 3-man pioneer squad. The 3-man versus the 6 is really about the utility. It's about making use of a smaller footprint, about more speed, and about lower points. It's a lower investment unit. That said, it's very fragile, and because we want value out of each of these activations, we're going to be using this for its designated role, which is to go for these utility options. Because of that, we're not really looking to invest even more resources into this, being command points, for instance. And maybe even if a situation comes up where we do have to, for example, if we want to do a cheese tactic and try to get 3 CP turn 1 by killing something that's an infiltrator and really squishy on the table, we're probably just going to die to the return fire because of how fragile we are. Because of that, you won't really get to make use of the ability to spam stratagems on it and keep rolling over the course of the game that 1 dice to get a 5+ and get a CP back. You're likely just going to die the turn you bring this thing out to do something. And even if you have to invest 1 stratagem on it, you probably won't roll that 5+ to get the CP back. Because of that alone, there's natively already more value in simply taking the other 2 options instead. But ignore stealth and ignore cover are really powerful abilities. It allows the unit to actually be a little bit more versatile, and instead of just playing for secondaries or utility, it allows you to also be able to get angles on units or characters and pick them up pretty reliably, because now you ignore cover, and if something does have stealth, you ignore that too. So let's say there's a pesky character hiding in a ruin, you go up into reserves, you come back down, you get an angle. Not only do you get to be in a table quarter for some objective, but you probably get to kill that infantry character anyway, even if he's standing in ruins. As a result of that, there's simply more value in taking the ignore stealth and the ignore cover option, and this is what you see in every competitive list. I mentioned several times in the video that there's different goals for running a 3-man versus 6-man brick, which takes me to the next point, archetypes. You have two primary archetypes when you decide to include bikes in your list. You could go for what I would call a standard approach, and this is running several 3-man utility pieces, as we previously discussed. You also have the option of taking the 6-man unit, and this is an archetype that I would define as being more aggressive or aggro. So what are the differences? Well, with a standard approach, you're really bringing these bikes in order to help score secondaries. You're focused on points, whether that's going for secondaries across the table using your movement to pop up and down, or if you're trying to touch some objective to get more primary because you're OC2. You also have the option to screen the board because you have a decently sized footprint and you're fast enough that you can move block something that you don't want to get close to you once you've gotten a little bit more value out of the unit. You also have the option to take advantage of that movement to try to get some smaller angles on a lone op or on some characters that might be hiding somewhere behind a ruin and pick them up because they're infantry and because you ignore cover. All in all, it's a very versatile unit and a versatile role to run them as because they excel so well at being this utility piece for just 90 points. On the other hand, we have the aggressive playstyle, the aggro, where we're running multiple 6-man bricks of these bikes. Why would we do that? Well, in this instance, they now act as more of a damage dealer. They're still very, very fast, they still get the maneuverability, but they're much more of an investment, both in terms of points and in terms of role on the table. We're actually relying on these to be a threat. And so because of that, we might be a little bit more receptive to actually spending some CP on these units, which is why, as a free bonus, we get to take all 3 of the war gears. So maybe we will get that 5+ CP back. In this context, whatever damage they do to infantry is magnified because you're now running 2 of the Highas and double everything else. So whatever solid damage you were doing before the low toughness targets with weaker saves is essentially doubled, making for an extremely punishing anti-infantry unit that's very fast and mobile and quite dangerous. I wanted to talk through some practical examples as to how you could use your bikes to get a little bit more value out of them. And so the first example here is with a standard archetype. So we're running 3 units of 3 bikes. We have A, B, and C, which are currently deployed inside of our deployment zone, as you can see highlighted in green. So in this first example, I just want to illustrate to you how impactful the scout and move could be if you're going first turn. What this means is that if you deploy at the line with 2 units, Unit C and Unit B, you have the option to scout move out and then take, after your 9-inch scout, a full 12-inch move. So you could very reliably get to either quadrant on your side of the deployment. This is really powerful because that means basically no matter what secondary you draw that might be difficult to score turn 1, you are primed and ready to do so. Let's say you get investigate signals. Well, very simple. You get to do it in 3 different table quarters. Or maybe you get engaged on all fronts, or even secure no man's land turn 1 if the objective is somewhere safe. We can also see that throughout the course of the game, after an opponent's turn, let's say we're out of position because we're somewhere quite far and we need to get somewhere a little bit closer or just reshuffle our units a little bit the stage. Well, in this case, we pop back up at the end of their turn and come down wherever we need to be. So, for example, Bike A, who is in our deployment zone, simply goes up and comes back down inside of theirs when we get to a later turn in the game. Another example is if your opponent is being a little bit too aggressive with one of their infiltrator units. One tactic that's employed by Votann players is taking one of your 4 judgment tokens and putting it on something very squishy that you know you'll be able to reliably kill turn 1. This ensures that you get 3 CP as early as possible, making the most amount of use out of your army rule. In this example, we see that the enemy Space Marine player has put a 5-man unit of scouts on the center objective. In this case, I take my scout move and then take a full move to be on the objective, touching it, and within range of the scouts. Because I have the ability to ignore cover, even if they're towed into the ruins, it doesn't matter. I still get to shoot them with everything I have, and if I pick them all up, which I probably will because they fit the target profile we're aiming for with these weapons, I'll gain access to 3 CP. This could be even more tempting if we draw something like Area Denial turn 1. It's essentially 2 for 1. You're basically trading 25 points to get VP and 3 CP. It's a pretty good deal. The last example I want to show you is with an aggressive archetype, so running 2 big squads of 6-man bikes. And this is actually based on a realistic example from one of the actual games played that I covered in the last competitive list analysis video against Thousand Suns. In this instance, what the player did was take a couple of turns to properly stage his bikes towards the center edge of both table ends, waiting for a good opportunity to jump on the Thousand Suns characters that were hiding in the enemy deployment zone. And that's essentially what he did. When he had a good opportunity, he jumped out from behind the ruins, he got the angle, and because these bikes absolutely mulch infantry, he was able to pick up basically every enemy unit he saw. Now, we really didn't get to do all that much math this video, and I feel like I might be doing the bikes a little bit of a disservice, particularly for the 6-man archetype. So to save everyone some time, I ran a full 6-man unit with all their weapons, being the shotguns, the coils, and 2 Highas, into a couple of different profiles that you see here on the screen and added up all the damage, just so we could get a better idea as to how effective these speedy guys and gals might be. And of course, I picked things that, based on our previous analysis, would probably be appropriate targets. And so running all the weapon profiles together with a 6-man squad, shooting into a 20-man unit of Cadian shock troops at toughness 3 with a save of 5+ and 1 wound, we see that they get 19.71 failed saves. Because they're only 1 wound each, this equates to 19.71 damage, or roughly 20 dead models, so a full squad. Now I went for something a little bit tougher here, so a 5-man brick of Custodian Guard. And what we get against a unit comprised of toughness 6, 2 up base save, and 3 wound models is 5.89 failed saves, which equates to 9.56 damage total when you consider there's going to be some damage spillover that happens, because the profile of the Magna Coil is damage 2. In this case, factoring in those variables, we wind up with, on average, 2 dead custodians and 1 left on 1 wound. Lastly, I put a unit here that, if I was playing Blood Angels, would be furious to lose the bikes, and this is a 10-man brick of Death Company with jump packs. And so these guys have toughness 4, 3 up base save, and 2 wounds. They also have a 6+ feel no pain. And so I did factor that into my results here as well. And what we get is 11.39 failed saves on average, which results in 16.39 damage that goes through. When we factor in their 6+ feel no pain, it takes the total damage pool down to 13.77, which is roughly 6 to 7 dead models, which unfortunately isn't enough. But is there a way for us to make this better? How do we get more value out of this aggressive style list where we're running 6-man bikes? And the answer might be through stratagems. I put 3 here on the screen that I think might be useful on the 6-man bike squad, but you may of course find yourself situationally using something on a 3-man if the circumstances demand it. And these would be Void Armor first, which essentially allows you to negate 1 point of AP, and it does stack with cover, so if you're against something that's AP 2, you'll stay at your 4 up base save as long as you're in cover. The next one is Ordered Retreat. A little bit more situational, but maybe if your bikes get tied down by something that's likely unable to kill them in melee, you could use Ordered Retreat to simply fall back, go somewhere else, shoot, and then charge if you need to get onto an objective, and stack some OC2. Now out of these 3, I do however think that this last one, Ancestral Sentence, is really the standout stratagem that's going to allow you to get a little bit extra punch into targets and help you deal with things that might be slightly out of your damage profile, or just enough to help kill them all. But please note, you can't stack sustained hits, so you wouldn't get sustained hits 3 on the Highas because it already has sustained hits 1. You would just simply get sustained hits 2, which would be the better of the 2. So you still do get some value out of this, but you're not actually stacking any sustained hits. So just for fun, I took 2 of the examples we just looked at, being the Custodian Guard and the Death Company Marines with jump packs, and I added in the damage that we would get if we were to run the Sustained Hits 2 strat on these guys. And what we get is a pretty significant difference. So originally, without the stratagem, we kill 2 on average and leave 1 on 1 wound. But if we use the strat, we kill between 3 and 4. So it is a little bit of an extra punch, and would probably just leave 1 custodian left if it's a 5-man squad. Pretty significant. Now against the Death Company Marines, which is a little bit more of an appealing profile to shoot these bikes into, we originally killed 6 to 7 dead models, but now we kill between 9 and 10. So we could potentially, even after the Feel No Pains, we could potentially kill the full squad of 10. which is pretty impressive when you consider that we don't typically consider bikes as being able to punch up above their weight. But a full squad of Death Company Marines are going to run you 230 points. And these guys do punch up reliably. So if you're able to get an angle on them with your bikes, which are only 180 points, and pick them up, not only have you gotten value just in terms of the actual points cost that you killed, but you're actually getting board presence value as well, because the Death Company Marines could probably kill anything else in your list. Now, before we wrap the video up, I just want to leave you with a few careful considerations to keep in mind for when you decide to bring this unit in your list. And the first one is understand your list. What is the goal for this unit? Are you bringing it because you're looking for something to score secondaries? Are you bringing it for utility? Or are you bringing this to play more of a damage offensive role with a 6-man brick? The second thing I'm going to mention here is to practice. It's surprisingly difficult to play this unit well on the table. Even if we know theoretically what we should be doing with them, it's tough because they're really fragile. And so if you do pop up and pop back down and someone overwatches them, for example, with a Doomstalker that has damage 3 shots hitting you on 5s in Overwatch, they're gonna melt. And if they do melt, well, you just lost your unit and you don't get to score your points. So you do have to be careful with positioning. They're extremely vulnerable, and because of that, you need to make sure you're taking full advantage of the table in order to ensure these guys don't die the second they land somewhere and before they get to actually do anything. I also want to add that because they're so fragile, they're probably just going to die to the punchback. So if you do decide to use this as an activation to shoot instead of an activation to do a secondary, I think that when you do get line of sight on something, if anything else can see you, you will just immediately die on your opponent's turn. Sure, the bikes are toughness 6, they have 3 wounds, one of them has 4 wounds, but they only have a 4-up base save. So if you're facing anything that has reliable damage 3 shooting, or anything that's dedicated towards anti-vehicles or anti-high elites or toughness, then I do think you're going to lose the unit, so you need to be very precise about how you plan on using them. So don't feel discouraged if you find you're not really using them properly in your games. There is a bit of a learning curve to actually using something as a dedicated scorer when you have access to guns and mobility. Another thing I want to mention is to remember points. So you're trying to always get as much value as you can out of a unit, and with a 3-man squad particularly, you probably won't kill too much and you'll just die to the punchback like I said. So consider how many victory points these guys are getting you as well into that factor. Are they doing their job? How can you make sure that you get your investment back? This takes me to my last point on making use of their movement. We've said it time and time again in this video, but it really is their biggest strength. You need to be on top of that and make sure that you're properly utilizing your abilities to go up into reserves and come back down. You're using your scout moves aggressively enough that you're positioning yourself for success early game depending on what secondaries you draw. And you need to make the decision as to when it's time to not use them for a secondary and instead pick a fight. Despite these considerations, the Pioneers are ultimately a very fun unit to field, and at 90 points for 3, you should always try to squeeze in a few of these in your lists. As always, if you enjoyed this video and kind of content, please don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think about the Pioneers, how they've been performing in your lists, and how you field them. Consider joining our Discord server free of charge to join in on all things Votann related. Rock and stone, baby!